I'm just going to tell you briefly about where I grew up, and then I'm going to tell you about what happened to me, and then I'm going to tell you about what should have been done and wasn't done. I grew up in a small enclave in West Belfast. It's now become known as the Lower Falls. Everybody had their doors open. I mean, 9 out of 10 men were unemployed. I remember leaving school in June of '69 and the teacher slapping us all in the back of the head because we'd pissed our education away. And he says, see, when you're walking home, count how many men are standing in street corners. You're going to join that rank because you never educated yourselves. And this is what it's about. It's about education, it's about organisation, and it's about dedication. And yous have it in spades. Yous have it in spades. Because yous come and yous take the motto and the ethos, you touch one, you touch all. That was the area I grew up in. Everybody helped each other. They were socialists without knowing it. My mother worked in a rag store, separating woolen clothes from linen clothes and cotton clothes. And there was mass unemployment, like I said, and some people had huge families. And some of the kids hadn't got the clothes to wear that day because the brother or the sister were wearing them. You know, families of 10 and 12. And people were down at a young age. I was a shoplifter. I didn't want to join the IRA. I wanted to chase girls and go to clubs and back horses and lose a few quid and occasionally get battered. That was part of growing up in West Belfast. Anyway, I ended up in London with Paul Hill. I was still stealing, still doing mad things, smoking a bit of weed, taking a few trips. That was the life I lived. I can't change what happened then. That was the life I wanted. I was never involved in Republican politics. And I went home. And on the 30th, or rather on the 20th of November, I was in the little bakery in Leeson Street, Rosie's, and I bumped into Paul Hill's mum, Lily. And she said, Gerry, my son's been arrested. My Paul's been arrested in London. They're going to charge him with bombings. And I said, Lily was with me. I was breaking into places. Get his solicitor to contact me. Anyway, on Saturday, the 30th of November 1974, they came to 32 Cypress Street and they kicked the door in. And they dragged me from my bed. Soldiers were blackened faces. One solitary RUC man. And they took me to Mulhouse Street Police Station. Army billet. And I was there for about 40 minutes and 2 special branch plainclothesmen came in. And they handcuffed me. And they put me in the back of a car. And they drove me a short distance from Mulhouse Street to Springfield Road. And we stopped at the junction of the Grosvenor Road and the Falls Road because the lights had changed. And they turned, the cop who was sitting in the passenger seat opened his coat and showed me a shoulder holster with a weapon. And he said, if you try to get out of the car, we're going to shoot you. I was a thief. I couldn't work out what was happening. They took me to this police station, took me to a desk sergeant. I gave my name, my date of birth, and they said, take him down to the end cell. And under no circumstances is anyone to see him. Hours had gone past. I didn't know what time it was. It was about 12:10 on Sunday morning. When the door opened, there was 2 policemen there. Little small one, tall one. The small one was called Detective Sergeant John McCall, Special Branch. And the big guy was Inspector Cunningham. They asked me my name. I told them my name and I was punched in the face. They broke my nose. And the clothes I was wearing started to get saturated with my blood. They said, you know what you got that for? Think about it, we'll be back in 10 minutes. 10, 15 minutes went past, and they came back. Only this time it was only McCall. And he took me by the ear, twisted it like a naughty schoolboy, marching me down the corridor and up the stairs to the interrogation rooms. And as I was going up, there was a foot patrol coming down. And he said, this is the murder and Irish bastard who blew up Guildford. This was the first time I'd heard Guildford being mentioned. And I'm not being disrespectful to what happened, the innocent people who got blew up in England, people such as yourselves coming to a social event, going out on a social night out, and bombs going off. But I knew nothing about this. They took me to the end room of a long, thin corridor. And in the room, sitting behind the desk, was Cunningham. And there was 2 cops I didn't know and hadn't been introduced to me. One was called Detective Inspector Saul Grundy, and the other was Detective Sergeant Jeremy. And they sat me in a seat, and McCall stood behind me, and they started asking me about IRA violence and IRA bombs and shooting. I knew nothing. I was a thief. And I said to them, I'm not in the IRA. I've never been in the IRA. The IRA wouldn't have somebody like me. And they started slapping me from behind, lifting me out of the chair by my hair. And then they threw a statement that Paul Hill had signed. And they had him, they said, in England. And I read the statement. And as I say, I was a gambler, I was a drinker, I was a smoker, all the rest. And I didn't even know what day of the week the Guildford pub bombings had happened. But what I did know was at the weekends when I was in London, I invariably spent them with my aunt and uncle, usually at a Conservative or Labour club, simply because they had a snooker table and it was for free. So I said, when did this happen? And he said, Saturday the 5th of October. And I said, well, I must have been with my aunt and uncle. And you had to be signed in by a member. That's how naive I was, telling them the truth. Because what they did was, they went to these two clubs and they stole the books. That's what they did. So anyway, I've read this statement. It's been signed by Paul Hill. And they lifted me out of the chair by the hair, and they stripped me naked. And they put me in the search position. And they would ask me questions. And when I couldn't answer them, because I didn't have the answers, they would kick my feet from under me, and I would slide down and hit my chin on the floor. I'd be dragged up again by the hair. This went on for 3 or 4 hours. They took me back to the cell, and they left me there overnight. The next day, they handcuffed me. They put a hood over my head. They put a belt around the hood. They took me to an airport, and they flew me to a foreign country. Today we call that rendition, and we relate to it to Guantanamo Bay. Rendition was state kidnapping back then, and that's what they did. They flew me to London on Sunday, the 1st of December 1974. When I was taken off the plane, they hooded me again, handcuffed me, put a belt around the hood, drove me to a police station that I now know was Addlestone. And when I arrived at the police station, they took me out of the car, and there was a gauntlet of maybe 15, 20 policemen on each side. As I walked in, I was being spat upon, punched, kicked, called every name under the sun. My mother was called an Irish whore. My sisters were Irish whores. And the amount of hatred that was emanating from them towards me was terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. They stripped me naked. They got around me and they all started having their little slapping kick. Dragged me to a cell, a last cell in a little corridor. And when I went in, there was snow coming in through the windows because they'd taken all the windows out. And there was only a concrete base for a bed. And I remember sitting there holding my knees naked, trying to make myself feel small. And the hatch to the cell dropped down, and a shotgun came in. And they told me to stand up. And I stood up and I covered my private parts, and they said, put your hands by your side. I started making insulting, degrading comments. Then they started making me do press-ups, sit-ups, squats, and they went away. And I sat back down again. 15 minutes later, they came and they repeated it. And this went on all night. All night. The next morning, Grundy and Jeremy came, and they took me from Addlestone to Godalming. And they took me to a cell, and the first thing they did was strip me naked again. And in the cell, there was only a toilet. And I hadn't had no food or water since I left Belfast, 36 hours previous. And when I rang the bell and asked for some water, they told me to drink it out of the toilet. They took me up the stairs to interrogate me, and took me into a small room at the end of the corridor next to the fingerprinting room. And there was a Smith clock on the wall, and it was 10 to 2. And they started torturing me again. Search position, arms spread, standing on your tiptoes. Young policewomen coming in, being encouraged to grab my testicles and twist them, to spit in my mouth, battering me. And when I fell to the floor, they'd be trailing me round the little room by the hair, telling me that they could kill me. They actually took me out. They actually took me out on the Tuesday night from Godalming hooded. They took me to a little country lane and they forced me out of the car. And they forced me to my knees and they took the hood off and put a gun in my mouth. Told me to make my peace with God and cocked the hammer and pulled the trigger, and I wet myself, pissed myself. I mean, what they did to us was incredible. And little did I know that while all this was going on, my father had went to the station I had been held in Belfast and had spoke to members of Scotland Yard, the bomb squad. And they told him to come over, that he would have access to me, that he would be able to pick a solicitor to provide me with legal representation. My father arrived the cheapest way he could. My father had worked at the shipyards, and he developed emphysema through having no health and safety. He was red-leading ships in the early 50s. All my life, all I've ever known is my father in and out of sanatoriums. He couldn't walk to the bar without stopping 2 or 3 times. But he made this incredible journey for me. And when he arrived, he first of all went to my Uncle Hugh's house. But little did he know that my Uncle Hugh had actually been arrested before me. So he went to my Aunt Annie's house and my Uncle Paddy's house. And he was there 3 hours, and his little suitcase was sitting on the floor when the police raided it. And this was a family, an Irish family from Belfast, who'd embraced the British way of life. My Uncle Paddy had fought for the British Army. My Aunt Annie was in the Conservative Club. My cousin Vincent wanted to be a policeman. My cousin Patrick had the dream of following his father into the same regiment and fighting for Queen and Country. These are the people who the police arrested and then fabricated the forensics against them. Come Thursday, the 5th of December, when they charged me, I was represented by the biggest law firm in London, Simon Muirhead and Allen from Covent Garden. And they sent me a guy called David Walsh, who was an out-of-work actor between jobs. We had just been arrested for the 2nd worst bombing in England, and they sent me an out-of-work actor. This was a frame-up from day one. I was too frightened to understand it at that time. And when they charged me and took me to Ward Street Court in Guildford, where at the top of the street was the Horse and Groom pub that the IRA had bombed and killed 5 people. There was crowds there, with nooses and rocks and rotten vegetables and eggs attacking the van, wanting to drag us out and lynch us in the street. So by the time they got me to Winchester Prison, I was never so relieved in my life to be out of the police stations, because I thought they were going to kill me in there. They were behaving like madmen. I was walking around the exercise yard after being on remand for a week in Winchester, and I thought, I'm going insane, because I could hear my father's voice, very faint. And I thought he was back home in Ireland. And I remember as we got close to the hospital part of the exercise yard, his voice got louder. And I looked up and I seen him at the window in grey and blue striped pajamas, like the Nazis did with the people they had in concentration camps. There was my father. He'd come over to get me a lawyer, been arrested, been charged. Anyway, we spent a year on remand and we went to court. And our trial started on the 16th of September 1975. And it finished on Wednesday, the 22nd of October 1975. And the judge who tried us did everything possible to facilitate the liars, the perjurers, the fabricators of evidence in convincing the jury. But he also had the press working for them outside, the government behind it. This was fit up from day one.